I'm Josh Pauli, professor up at Dakota State and the College of Computing. We have a full panelist. I don't know how we're all going to fit up here, but we're going to find out. So we have Celia Paulsen back, cybersecurity researcher at NIST. Sorry. I'm always in the way. Celia Paulsen, cybersecurity researcher with NIST, is going to present to get us started here in a second. Matt Barrett, who's one of the framework program managers from NIST, will take part in the Q&A portion. Reggie McKinney from DHS, spoke earlier today, is back again. Jesse Ward, who was Vanna White just a second ago, and now I'm Vanna White, from the Rural Broadband Association, is here. And then Sheriff Mike Milstead, who is the vice chair of the U.S. Department of Justice's Global Advisory Committee, maybe better known for most of us as the Minnehaha County Sheriff. So anyways, we're going to start with Celia first, and then Jesse's also going to present to get us kicked off.
So we have lots of resources for you from NIST. This first slide is actually not framework specific. This is general cybersecurity stuff. So first off, the Small Business Association has a whole lot of great resources for small businesses trying to do cybersecurity. Have the link there. They have some training. They have so pretty much every single organization that I'm going to list on here has their own best practices, their own list of what you must do. And I'm sorry. Luckily, they overlap a lot, so that's pretty much the same for all of them. But if you ever, there's no lack of best practices. So Small Business Association, they have their own list of things that you need to do. The FCC, it was talked about earlier. This is the lighter side of FCC, the not so scary side of it. They have a lot of good resources for small businesses as well, not in a regulatory manner, in a trying to help you manner. And then the FTC, I've listed two on here. They resources for privacy and security, and then ID theft. They're a really good resource if you're stuck, if something happens and you don't know quite what to do right then. That's a great place to hit up because it'll say, this is where you need to go, this is who you need to talk to. That's very useful. I can never get that acronym right. The next one is about, they have great videos. If you need to do training with your people, if you need to do, training to your CEOs, this is actually really good. They have videos on there that a lot of people have probably seen in here, but just general awareness videos. And then the last one, the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, is totally different. It's where you need to go if you're looking for talent. And it's still in its early stages. It's been in its early stages for the last 5 years. But it's trying to build up a cybersecurity workforce. And it's a very good resource if you're in industry and you say, hey, I need talent and I don't know quite what I need, but I know I need it. That's where you need to go. And by the way, I'm the industry coordinator for that. So if you have questions on that, you can ask me. So framework specific things. There's a lot of examples of framework resources. The NIST Framework website has a whole bunch of industry resources, more than you could possibly go through in your lifetime. So don't try, but it's really good. The Intel case was talked about. There's a couple other cases that are on the website. The energy sector, how different people are using the framework, including international, like Italy. And there's it was talked about earlier, states and local governments have started using the framework. And this is some examples of how they're using it in their organizations. And I wouldn't, it's going to keep growing. That's a given. So just be aware of how other states are doing it, and then you might be prepared. And then the big links, and all of these are available, obviously. So the NIST website, we have lots of 600-page documents that you can read through. I think we're on number 183, I think. NIST special publications, and then we also have several thousand white papers. So if you want to know, for example, one of the ones I wrote a long time ago was how does cybersecurity work with 3D printing? We have a paper on that. So go ahead and look at NIST, and you'll find a whole bunch of technical documents ranging from everything from how to set up a basic cybersecurity program all the way to how do you secure a copier. And that's on the csrc.nist.gov site. And then there's the framework website, which has all of the case studies and everything like that.
How many of you have heard and aware of the CISRIC 4 guidance before this meeting, I guess, Working Group 4? Okay, good. How many people have dug into it, they would say? Really read through some of it? Okay, a few. That's great. Okay, so what I wanted to do today, again, I'm going to keep it brief. I'm going to talk a little bit about sector-specific implementation guidance, and even more specifically, the communications sector. But not to be left out, there are a lot of other sectors that have developed specific implementation guidance. They've adapted the framework for their sector based upon their needs, their interpretation of critical infrastructure, perhaps even the regulations that are already in place. So you've heard that talked about the Department of Energy has a guide based upon the framework. Our friends at the American Water Works Association also have a guide. It's really interesting working with them a bit because they share some of the same challenges we do, their resources, operational resources, technical, et cetera. So more in common than we think. And finally, the CISRIC guidance. I'm going to march through it just a little bit and kind of dig out some of the value and important pieces that are there. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out there are several people in the room who devoted many, many hours to working on the CISRIC report. Robert Mayer from US Telecom was the co-chair. I led the small and mid-sized business group. It was a really team effort. Insight, Kathy Whitbeck, you've heard from, Silver Star, Windstream is in the room. There's a lot of people that really worked on this. Thank you. Okay, so the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council, CISRIC, they are rechartered on an annual basis, so you'll hear it referred to more than once, but they're talking perhaps at different times about different working groups or subject matter. So in regard to the framework and cybersecurity best practices, we're talking about CISRIC 4, the fourth iteration of CISRIC, and then Working Group 4. And they had a report on cybersecurity best practices. Again, that working group was charged with adapting the framework to communications operators and their needs. The other thing is we would mention there's a whole front matter that talks about those macro level assurances. In addition to adapting the framework to our needs, the FCC said to industry, we want you to give us macro level assurances. So assure us that industry is going to use this. Tell us how you're going to do that, how you're going to assure us. So you'll see some information in the beginning. Unfortunately, as we said, we've moved to a bit beyond that now, but it's important to remember there's a lot of good information in that document about how to use the NIST framework. So in regards to critical infrastructure, CISRIC really viewed the framework through the lens of critical infrastructure, and here's the definition from the executive order. I wanted to pull this out because it's kind of important to keep in mind as you read that report. So CISRIC really acknowledged that the NIST framework can and should be implemented or used at the enterprise or business level. It's a good business practice, it's good corporate citizenship to do that, but that really wasn't the spirit of the Working Group 4 effort. For SMBs in particular, small and mid-sized businesses, it would be quite difficult. You're looking at this framework, you're on the cliff, and to think about implementing it or using it for your entire business operation. So instead, what you should kind of look at is critical infrastructure and how can we apply the framework to securing critical infrastructure. You can see here the definition. We have a debilitating impact on security, national economic security, national public health. If you're a small business, you might not quite meet that definition, but you can kind of scale it appropriately for your needs and your service area. So for instance, if you're a small communications operator, it might mean that you interpret core network and critical infrastructure as your switch and keeping communications available to anchor institutions that need it, such as public safety answering points. So I'm going to talk a little bit. Within this CISRIC group, we had a small and mid-sized business report. Again, I led that group. That small and mid-sized business group and report was made up of members from all the 5 different segments within the industry. But when we got together, we realized we had a lot more in common than we thought. We all had limited resources. The employees were wearing many different hats. They had difficulty sometimes gaining management buy-in or board buy-in. And they were new to the approach to risk management to cybersecurity. So although they represented different segments, when we were looking at the framework, we realized that we all had something in common. And what the SMB, the small and mid-sized group, did is we wanted to break down the framework into manageable bites. So the SMB group and the other groups as well, what they did is they looked at the NIST framework, and we ourselves spent, I would say 6 sessions doing the same thing, marching through as a group. Is this subcategory in or out of scope? So will it help us protect our critical infrastructure and core network based upon our limited resources? And the second thing we did is we said, how critical is this practice or subcategory for a company to use? So going back here a bit, so we assigned each subcategory a criticality, whether it was 1 to 5, and those with a 4 or 5 we then brought down into a final list. So out of the 98 subcategories, the SMB group identified 37 they considered to be high priority. You can also look at this as a profile. This is just one concept, and again, we're talking about a handful of us in a room, and so it shouldn't be taken as a prescriptive list. You've heard this a lot from us up here on the stage. CISRC report is over 400 pages, so you can find this on page 392. We also had an engineering use case. So we said, okay, what's another way to look at this? And there was a company that had already used the NIST framework, and what they did is they took those 37 high priority practices that we looked at and said, how did they use those, or how could you use those? How do you apply them? What does it really mean? So for instance, when you're inventorying your assets, what specific assets does that mean? So this is another way to look at the information. I encourage you to look at the use case. Page 384. The SMB report has an appendix of tools and resources. They've got cybersecurity best practices, open source security tools, planning guides for incident response, step-by-step guides in developing a security plan, self-assessment tools. There's a lot of good stuff there. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the other reports that are in that CISRC report. Again, it's 400 pages. The small and mid-sized business report is just one section. So the wireline report, they kind of did the same sort of process that the SMB group did. They marched through the framework, and they identified 25 high priority practices. I should also say they looked at the framework and the subcategories through the lens of core network or critical infrastructure. Again, that's the scope they used. And they defined core network and critical infrastructure as specific pieces. Your core transport nodes, your submarine cable landing sites, of course I don't expect anyone here to have that, your DNS servers, and your E911 routing systems and databases. So again, that might be helpful for you as you say, where do we start? This is a place to start to scope the exercise. And interestingly, they went through the same process, and the wireline group came up with 25. The small business group came up with 37. No, none of it is wrong, right? Either approach. It's just a different way. They had a different group of folks looking at it. But again, you heard Carrie talk about yesterday, one of the ways they used this report is to say, okay, let's go through and highlight in our use of the framework and their company's use of the framework, the priority practices from CISRC, and see what we're doing in those areas and if we need to be doing more. Barriers and requirements report, it's the final section I'll highlight. They assess the required resources, operational and technical, for each of the 98 subcategories. Again, some really good work there. Page 202. So that's it. I know we're trying to keep things short, so I'm going to turn it over. There are some other resources I would suggest, but I'll kind of save those for Q&A. Hopefully someone will ask me.
I guess I'm really curious from the law enforcement perspective. Maybe it's us in the rural communities don't really connect cybersecurity with what we view as traditional law enforcement. So could you talk about the role of cybersecurity or the role of law enforcement in cybersecurity and maybe how things have changed in the last 3 to 5 years?
Absolutely. It was interesting when Vernon called me, Vernon Brown from SDN called me and wanted to meet for coffee about 3 blocks from here, and sat down and told me he wanted to, that he'd been working with his boss and they wanted to bring over 100 people here to try to prevent crime and improve security in our critical infrastructure. It's like, wow, that's awesome. And it was exciting. And I've heard the term excitement, although sometimes talking about this stuff isn't exciting, but for me, it's a real challenge. You know, I serve on a number of committees in DC, and our focus has always been trying to engage the private sector, engage our critical infrastructure partners with government to try to make things better and make things more secure. To me, when I look at NIST and I look at the cybersecurity framework, that's exactly what occurred. It was government, private sector, it was collaboration. They put together something. I'm in a world where we are very audit heavy in our evaluations and in our systems. This is a risk-based framework, and it's voluntary and it's flexible and it's a living framework, as I understand it, that it's going to grow and develop as technology changes, as threats change. But it's a no-brainer for me. Quite frankly, there's a number of takeaways that I would have if I was in your position from this conference. It's interesting. We have the South Dakota State Homeland Security Conference is going on about 2 miles west of here at the exact same time as this one, and I've been bouncing back and forth between that one and this one. Secretary Jones, Trevor Jones is the governor's Secretary of Public Safety is here in the room. The PUC is represented. There's a lot of interest in government as to this security issue. If I could give you takeaways from a sheriff's perspective, it would clearly be, number one, if you're not using the NIST framework, I think you've heard the message has been clear throughout this conference, and that is it's a no-brainer to at least engage in it and use it as a guide and a template and use the resources that have been developed, because the consequences if you don't do something like that, the consequences of breaches, and then being able to tell the citizens or your users that, well, we didn't do any of that. We had resources available, we chose not to do it. We didn't dedicate people to that. The consequences are certainly, could be devastating to your company, to your organization, to the people who trust you. You are our critical infrastructure, and it's extremely important for us to understand that. The second thing for me that is huge is when Vernon and I sat down and talked, I thought about our South Dakota Fusion Center, and I thought about James Legg, who has come and presented to you. If you're not connected with the South Dakota Fusion Center, you need to be connected with them. Not only can they provide you with alerts and warnings and updates and threats and vulnerabilities, but they can provide you with instant access to your local law enforcement. So if you have a breach, if you have an intrusion, if you have something, utilizing the South Dakota Fusion Center is a perfect way to not only get your issue addressed and brought to the attention of law enforcement, but also to get the word out to others who could be victimized by that. And another thing I like about NIST, quite frankly, is the privacy and civil liberties protections that it considers in the framework, and that's a huge thing. You have a lot of personal information on people who you have accounts with you, and that privacy and civil liberties is a very important part. And probably the last one is, I'm going to echo exactly what they said at the cybersecurity presentation at our Homeland Security Conference. If you're not using InfraGard, you should. You should be on it, you should be aware of it, you should be utilizing it. InfraGard is a great resource for you. Now, there's other things out there. HISN, Homeland Security Information Network. Our United States government's invested about $1 billion in taxpayer dollars on Homeland Security Information Network. I don't know that it's robust yet in this, in particular in the communications sector, but it will come. And when it does, I think the Fusion Center or James Legg would reach out to you and get you accounts in HISN so that you can do. It's a sensitive but unclassified portal. I've been on the advisory committee for it for 10 years. It's slow to take off, but it has some great capabilities for you. but I wouldn't want to direct you there until it's ready for you. So, I mean, those are some of the things I want to step back because, quite frankly, we have new trends that we're seeing in law enforcement in our community, dealing with the internet. We're really, as there's a lot of parents in here, grandparents, uncles and nieces and aunts, and quite frankly, there's some concerning things in that area that we're dealing with. And while it's outside, maybe what this NIST framework is, the reality is you all have, you may be sending bills, you may have customers, you may be able to be, for us, for law enforcement, that community outreach to say, look, there's some really good resources out there, not only for us to utilize to secure our network, but maybe for you to secure your home network, maybe for you to make sure, are you still using eight character passwords, or maybe you should think about going to 16. What are your kids doing on the internet? There are some really great resources out there. The number one resource for the internet right now for kids and safety is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Kids, or Children, NCMEC, and it's called missingkids.org. They have everything available for you and you could outreach that to some of the people that you deal with. So I'll step back, but I have full-time staff assigned to the internet crimes, and they're very busy. They work in conjunction with the state DCI task force. So I just appreciate the fact that you're here, and I am standing between them and a cheeseburger. In fact, I was in this very motel about 3 weeks ago with Senator Thune having lunch with him, and he had the director of TSA with him, and we're talking at the table, and both those guys are fitness nuts, and so John Thune was talking. He said, Sheriff, do you they were talking about running on the bike trail, and he said, Sheriff, do you run on the bike trail? And I said, John, if you see me run on the bike trail, tackle the guy in front of me. Because that's the only time I'll be running on the bike trail.
Any specific cases or stories you can tell us about what your officers are seeing in trends in Minnehaha County or across the state in terms of internet crimes?
Yeah, a couple of things that are coming up more and more is obviously you all know that sexting has become an issue, in particular with our school-aged kids. I wish they made more phones that didn't have a camera, quite frankly. I know your kids would like to take a picture, but a lot of times kids are taking inappropriate pictures, they're sharing them, and now we have something that's called sextortion, which is really exactly what you'd think it is. They send that picture out, somebody captures that picture, even maybe it's a Snapchat, but they get a copy of it. They literally will extort money out of that child to avoid trying to send that thing out further. And there are a lot of times where a parent, and if you're around South Dakota at all, and you've ever seen our Parents Matter campaign, Secretary Jones, they help fund it through highway safety. I go there and talk about tragedies on our highways and from drunk drivers, and and it always says, have the talk with your kids. Quite frankly, if you talk to your kids about drugs, you talk to your kids about drinking, you better be talking to them about social media, better be talking about their cell phone, and you better be talking about the internet, because there are some serious issues going on with our kids and the internet. And in particular, you're handing them something that has access to some of the most valuable information in the world, but also some of the most deviant sexual predators in the world are on the same thing. So kids they like to text. So what do they find out? Well, mom and dad, they'll read my text. So what happens? They now get an app in their phone where the app I'm thinking of, I'll use an example. Now, a lot of people use these apps for good reasons. Kik, K-I-K, is an app where now if I have the app and you have the app, we can text and it's not traceable. My parents can't see it. And so if your kid has an app like that, it's a person-to-person app, and it becomes into a whole group of people. Unfortunately, the pedophiles have found those apps, and they love them because they know, number one, that company's in Canada, very difficult to trace. Moms and dads are the first reporters of sex trafficking and pedophiles preying on their kids when they check text messages. Well, they can't check it. All they see is the kid's got an app on their phone. So parents are going to have to, I mean, and I don't know, there's the nanny app for the parents can get to follow and monitor their kids' behavior on the phone. That phone and that internet, the presenter out at our conference today, or yesterday, said, look, I mean, he's narrowed his wireless in his home down to you can either be sitting at the kitchen table or you can be sitting, you know, in their office where their parents are. But it's not even, you can't even have access beyond that because of the people who will prey on our kids and take advantage of our kids and our kids who are making some foolish mistakes. And bullying is another whole deal, but that's the trend, Vernon. It's a serious concern. And the number one cure for it is parents. Parents will need to be able to supervise their kids on that internet. And there are some apps that kids don't need. Why do you need an app that your parents can't read?
I actually have a question about the NIST framework itself and how you can use it as a tool, not so much the tools you guys just went through. But when we sat down and started looking at the NIST framework itself, we found that just because of how our organization was currently structured, that assigning tiers to anything would have been a nightmare because most people who needed to make those decisions were unaware of what needed to be done. So we actually used the NIST framework, all those identify, protect, and so on, and we broke down what do we currently have in place. So instead of putting tiers in, we put in what do we have in place. Do we have password protection policies? Do we have endpoint protection policies? Do we have firewall monitoring? So on and so forth. And then we put in our target profile, again, instead of using tiers, what do we think we should see so that our executives, our board president, and our board can make decisions as to that. And I'm just wondering, have other people done that, or are we off base there? Because it's worked really, really well for us as a very flexible tool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, your description is not unique. Other people have used it in that way, and that just speaks to the flexibility. You know, you saw earlier when Jeff and Tim were presenting some of the information about how they had applied framework. They brought those tiers right down to the subcategory by subcategory level. Some people don't even use it that way. Some people treat tiers as more of an overarching sort of thing. So you know, once again, it comes back to whatever's providing the biggest business value to you. It sounds like the people that didn't even know they needed to make the decision, I think was a phrase I latched onto there when you're saying, I mean, there's certainly an opportunity there. So, I mean, once again, part of the value of this is the journey, right? So you discovered that opportunity and now you can go tackle it.
This question's for Reggie, and I was just hoping that you could talk more about the cyber resilience review and how a company in DHS would work through that review and what are the benefits that a company receives after that non-technical analysis.
Okay, so a lot of started by saying that a lot of the tools and the resources that we have available at the C-Cube website, we have them, we've essentially mapped them to the 5 core functions. So within Identify, we have tabbed the CRRs, which is a no-cost cyber resilience review where we have a team that will will come out to your site. They will work with you. They will take you through the process and then sit down with you to talk to discuss the scoring. This is all PCII between you and DHS. None of the information goes any further than you, but it's essentially a tool there for you. A lot of you already have baselines, but this is certainly a tool that will come out and it goes through the various the various aspects of the networks. One of the other good things that they've done now is they've tied the CRR to the NIST framework, so that overlay is there as well now. So they will come out, they will do the CRRs, give you a comprehensive review, and kind of give you a scoring system, and kind of give you a baseline of where you actually sit. And so, I heard a couple of, gentlemen earlier, Mr. I believe Jefferson, I forget his last name, but he talked about, like the low-hanging fruit. So the CRRs is there, to be able for you to catch that low-hanging fruit. And again, and it maps to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So, and all of it is, the tool is there on the website as well. If you go to the CCube website, there's a CSET tool, a cybersecurity evaluation tool as well, that has instructions. You can download it, and you can actually go through the series of questions yourselves and, receive a score. So either way, we just want you to be able to utilize the tool, or we can come out and we can assist you in providing that service.
If you were going to implement or use the framework, would you recommend starting, like, looking through some of those sector-specific implementations, or do you think it's better if somebody starts from scratch and does it truly from the ground up?
Good question. I don't think there's a wrong way to go about it, right? I think what Carrie said is very true yesterday. You just got to get started. Jeff had the same message. You just got to pick a place. I felt that when we were in CISRIC. We had this task of how do we adapt the framework to the communications sector, and we had long discussions about it, and then we just eventually said, okay, let's start with IDAM1. And we got into a groove, and the same thing happened for us as the CISRIC Advisory Council industry that happened at the company level, we were finding, which is that, we just had a couple of meetings, we were going through the subcategories, we were having that dialogue. So if you start pulling, back to your question, if you were to go to that sector-specific guidance, that might provide a place to start. Maybe you start with those subcategories that have been identified for you, that implementation guidance, and say, how are we doing here? Let's discuss them. Maybe you just start at the top of the framework and say, let's start here. Let's see what we get through in the next half hour. I completely agree with the message they had. Getting started is the hardest part, and there's no wrong way to go about doing it. You just got to jump in.
All right, well, we'll turn it over to, so give us a hand to the panelists here.